It's 4 a.m. on a freezing winter morning in 1320 CE, and you're a 35-year-old beggar huddled beneath a market stall in London. Your threadbare cloak offers no protection from the bone-chilling cold. You haven't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and you're about to spend another dawn wandering the streets, displaying your withered leg to strangers, hoping someone will drop a copper coin into your wooden bowl before the authorities arrest you for begging without a license. Welcome to medieval beggar life. It's not quite what romantic notions of charitable Middle Ages would suggest. Today we're diving into what daily existence was actually like for beggars in medieval Europe. And I'm warning you right now, this is going to shatter any idealized notions you might have about Christian charity in the Middle Ages. We're talking extreme poverty, social exclusion, brutal punishments, and a world where 20% of the population wandered the roads homeless, looking for work or charity, only to die beneath roadside hedges. Let's start with who became a beggar, because if you think it was a lifestyle choice, medieval beggars would like a word. The descent into begging people didn't aspire to become beggars. They fell into it through catastrophic circumstances beyond their control. Physical disability was the most common pathway. A carpenter who lost his hand in an accident couldn't work anymore. A weaver struck by sudden blindness had no means of support. Medieval society had no social safety net, no disability insurance, no welfare system. If you couldn't work and your family couldn't support you, begging became your only option for survival. Old age sent countless people into begging. A day laborer's body simply wore out after decades of brutal physical work. Without children or savings, elderly workers found themselves on the streets. Women became beggars through widowhood. When a husband died, many women lost their homes and livelihoods entirely, especially if they had no male relatives to protect them. Economic collapse pushed entire families into begging. Failed harvests, the Black Death, warfare, and the enclosure movement that turned farmland into sheep pastures all created waves of unemployed, homeless people. In 15th century Vienna alone, about 2,000 of the city's 20,000 inhabitants belonged to marginalized groups living on the fringes. Scholars estimate that roughly 20% of medieval Europe's population was destitute and homeless at any given time, wandering the roads looking for work or charity. These weren't abstract statistics. These were real people whose world had collapsed beneath them. On your day from dawn to dusk, if you were lucky enough to have survived the night, your day as a beggar began before dawn. Where you slept depended on the season and your connections. In towns, you might have paid a porter 1 copper coin to sleep in a warehouse. In the countryside, you huddled in barns, beneath hedges, or simply in the open with nothing but your cloak. Some desperate beggars actually buried themselves in manure piles during winter to avoid freezing to death. Others ate arsenic to dull the pain of the cold. Thousands died every year from exposure. Mourning meant finding your begging spot. Location was everything. Church steps were prime territory because worshippers leaving Mass were in a charitable mood. Market squares offered steady foot traffic. Bridge entrances captured people entering and leaving towns. But every good spot had competition. Other beggars, some with more visible disabilities or better connections, might already claim the best locations. Disputes over begging territory could turn violent. Your success depended on your story and your appearance. If you had a genuine, visible disability, you displayed it prominently. The blind kept their eyes exposed. The lame exaggerated their limps. Those with missing limbs positioned themselves so people couldn't miss the absence. You needed to look pitiful, but not threatening. too ragged, and people avoided you as potentially dangerous. Too healthy looking, and they accused you of fraud. The actual act of begging was a performance. You recited your story repeatedly. Maybe you'd been injured in a fall. Perhaps your family died in the plague. You emphasized your inability to work, your desperate need for charity, your prayers for your benefactors' souls. Medieval Christianity emphasized almsgiving as a path to salvation. So beggars reminded people that giving to the poor secured their place in heaven. Some beggars learned to pray aloud in Latin, demonstrating religious devotion that encouraged donations. Food came from several sources. Churches and monasteries distributed alms regularly, though you often had to wait in long lines with hundreds of other desperate people. Some hospitals provided meals to beggars who appeared at their gates. Individual households occasionally gave bread scraps or leftover stew, but nothing was guaranteed. One medieval letter described a student beggar going door to door through terrible mud, bringing home nothing unless God went with him. For beggars, that reality multiplied exponentially. The fraud problem. Not every beggar you saw on medieval streets was genuinely unable to work. The prevalence of fraudulent begging became such a concern that authorities developed entire classifications for different types of fake beggars. The clapperdudgeon was someone who used elaborate ruses to appear ill or injured. Some beggars stripped themselves, hid their clothes, and pretended to have been robbed. Others stuck boils made of wax onto their skin, or attached tumors made from raw offal to look diseased. The counterfeit crank used soap to foam at the mouth and faked violent fits. The Tom o' Bedlam pretended to be insane, following people around making disturbing noises until they paid him to go away. Medieval records document beggars mutilating themselves or their children to stir up compassion. In London in 1380, 2 men were set in the pillory for pretending to be mutes, making horrible roaring noises to deceive people into giving them money. Authorities were well aware of these deceptions. In London in 1381, a beggar named Adam Ryebread was brought to trial for allegedly feigning disability, although he was healthy and quite capable of working. His name itself was telling, rye bread, because he lived beyond what poor people could afford through his fraudulent begging. A physical examination of his body proved he wasn't disabled. This widespread fraud created terrible problems for genuinely disabled beggars. It made people suspicious of all beggars, reducing charity and increasing hostility. It also provided justification for increasingly harsh laws against begging. Licenses, badges, and control. By the late 14th and 15th centuries, authorities across Europe began implementing systems to control and regulate begging. The principle was simple. Distinguish between the quote "poor" who genuinely couldn't work and sturdy beggars who were able-bodied but chose begging over labor. In Scotland, the Parliament passed an act in 1424, making begging illegal except by those wearing an official badge. These beggars' badges were made from lead, pewter, copper, or other cheap metals. Each parish or burgh issued badges to local poor who were verified as unable to work due to age, disability, or widowhood. The badges usually featured serial numbers and the coat of arms of the issuing authority. Beggars had to wear them visibly on their outer clothing. Scotland's system even included king's beadsmen, also called blue gowns because of their official cloaks. These royal beggars received special badges marked pass and repass, allowing them to beg anywhere in the kingdom. Every monarch's birthday, each king's beadsman received a new cloak, a tin badge, a Scotch shilling for every year of the monarch's age, and their dinner. They lived in a lodge house outside Edinburgh. England implemented similar licensing systems. The 1530 Vagabonds Act empowered justices of the peace to assign specific areas where the impotent poor could beg. Anyone begging outside their designated area faced 2 days and nights in the stocks on bread and water. Able-bodied beggars caught begging were whipped and forced to return to their birthplace. These licensing systems gave authorities unprecedented control over beggars' movements and livelihoods. Before badges, beggars existed somewhat outside normal social restrictions, moving freely from place to place. Now authorities could restrict them to specific parishes, monitor their activities, and punish unauthorized begging. For licensed beggars, the badge provided some legal protection, but also marked them publicly as objects of charity and state supervision. The lucky ones: hospitals and almshouses. A privileged minority of beggars found places in hospitals or almshouses. By the 1520s, probably 5,000 to 6,000 people in England lived in such residential institutions. But getting a spot was extremely difficult, and life inside wasn't comfortable. Medieval hospitals were different from what we'd recognize today. They functioned more like nursing homes crossed with homeless shelters. St. John's Hospital in Canterbury, established in the late 11th century by Archbishop Lanfranc, gave 24-hour care to men and women oppressed by various kinds of infirmities. It was the first hospital in England to provide long-term care for people too ill or disabled to function in mainstream society. Life in a hospital followed a strict religious routine. Residents participated in religious services multiple times daily, with prayers, scripture readings, and masses forming crucial parts of their schedule. Some hospitals adhered to Benedictine or Augustinian rules, including maintaining silence during meals and engaging in communal labor when possible. The chapel was central to everything. Medieval hospitals cared for the soul as much as the body. Medical care was rudimentary. Residents received basic attention, including wound care and herbal remedies administered by hospital clerics or lay attendants. Dietary regulations prescribed nutrient-rich foods like fish, bread, and pottage to support weakened immune systems. But treatment options were limited by medieval medical knowledge. Almshouses were different from hospitals. While hospitals usually provided meals and basic care for bedridden residents, almshouses generally offered only housing and perhaps a few benefits. Many almshouse residents who were still mobile had to beg individually to supplement whatever donations they received as gifts and bequests. Not everyone qualified for admission. Most institutions accepted only local beggars from their parish or town. Many were established to care for specific groups: elderly priests, widows, former servants of noble families, or retired guild members. If you were a foreigner, young and able-bodied, or considered morally undeserving, you had no chance of admission. For those who did gain entry, life meant following strict rules. Residents were required to lead orderly, moral lives under the supervision of a master or warden. Attendance at daily prayers was mandatory. In exchange, you received a small dwelling and basic support, finally escaping the constant terror of sleeping in the streets and wondering where your next meal would come from. The punishments. Medieval authorities treated unlicensed begging as a serious crime. The laws grew progressively harsher over time, driven by fears that masses of beggars threatened social order and that able-bodied people were exploiting charity. The Vagabonds and Beggars Act of 1494 ordered that vagabonds and idle persons be set in stocks for 3 days and nights with nothing but bread and water, then expelled from town. In 1530, the punishment changed to whipping. A 1547 law was viciously extreme. It subjected vagabonds to 2 years of slavery, branded with a quote 8 on their forehead. Parliament reconsidered and repealed it, returning to whipping in 1550. The Vagabonds Act of 1572 decreed that unlicensed beggars over 14 years old should be severely flogged and branded on the left ear unless someone would take them into service for 2 years. For a repeated offense, if they were over 18, they faced execution unless someone took them into service. The third offense brought execution without mercy as felons. These weren't empty threats. Records show authorities conducted regular sweeps of towns to root out unlicensed beggars. Those found guilty could be subjected to branding, imprisonment, or banishment. Sheriffs rounded up masterless men, including itinerants like wood or wool gatherers. By 1569 alone, 13,000 vagrants were seized across England. The brutality of these laws reflected deep anxieties about social disorder. Authorities viewed wandering beggars as dangerous elements outside normal social control. They feared that masses of mobile poor people could spread disease, commit crimes, or even organize resistance. These laws aimed to force everyone into fixed locations under the supervision of local authorities. The reality behind Christian charity. Medieval Christianity strongly emphasized charity. The Bible commanded believers to care for the poor. Giving alms was considered an important act that helped secure salvation. Monasteries and churches regularly distributed food and support. In theory, beggars served an important religious function, providing opportunities for Christians to demonstrate charity and thereby earn their place in heaven. But reality was far more complicated. While individual acts of charity certainly occurred, systemic support was inadequate for the scale of need. Attitudes toward beggars were profoundly ambivalent. Seen individually, a beggar was pathetic and deserving of compassion. Seen collectively, beggars were viewed as dangerous, willfully idle, and threatening to social order. The church itself often failed to live up to its charitable ideals. Yes, monasteries distributed alms, but never enough to actually solve poverty. The dissolution of monasteries during the Tudor Reformation removed even this inadequate source of relief, making conditions worse. Churches preached charity, but many wealthy church officials lived in luxury, while beggars starved at their gates. Common people's charity was limited by their own poverty. Most medieval people lived on subsistence margins themselves. They couldn't afford regular donations. When they did give, it was often token amounts: a piece of bread, a copper coin, permission to sleep in a barn for one night. Stories about beggars receiving generous help were exceptions that proved the rule. Why any of this matters. Medieval beggars existed at the absolute bottom of society. They lived and died in conditions of extreme deprivation that we can barely imagine today. 20% of the population wandering homeless, dying beneath hedges, burying themselves in manure to avoid freezing, resorting to fraud out of desperation, being whipped and branded for trying to survive. Yet these institutions and attitudes shaped responses to poverty for centuries afterward. The distinction between deserving poor and undeserving poor that medieval authorities codified still influences modern welfare debates. The licensing systems for beggars evolved into the poor laws and eventually modern social services. The suspicion of fraud, the desire to control and restrict poor people's movements, the belief that poverty results from moral failure, these medieval attitudes persist today. The medieval beggar's experience reveals fundamental truths about how societies respond to extreme poverty. When charity is voluntary and inadequate, people suffer and die in massive numbers. When authorities prioritize control over compassion, the vulnerable face brutal punishment. When we allow 20% of our population to live in desperate circumstances, we've failed as a civilization. Life was harsh, brutal, and often short for medieval beggars. They wandered roads looking for work that didn't exist. They displayed their disabilities and recited their stories day after day. They slept in manure and ate arsenic to dull the pain. They faced whipping, branding, and execution for the crime of being poor. Most died without ever finding security or comfort. But these people endured. They found ways to survive in a world that viewed them as threats rather than human beings deserving of dignity. They created informal networks of support among themselves. Some found refuge in hospitals and almshouses. A few even secured those precious badges that gave them legal permission to beg, tiny scraps of official recognition that they mattered. Their stories, preserved in court records, hospital registers, and legal documents, remind us that poverty has always been with us, but our responses to it are choices. Medieval Europe chose inadequate charity combined with brutal punishment. The consequences were predictable: mass suffering, early death, and a permanent underclass wandering the roads in search of survival. If you enjoyed this deep dive into medieval beggar life, make sure you're subscribed for more analytical approaches to history. What other aspects of medieval daily life would you like to see covered? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching.